order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Annette Brooke.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today marks the 12th anniversary of the tragic terrorist attack on New York's Twin Towers. I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in sending our condolences to all those who are affected by this abhorrent attack, including the families of the 67 British citizens who lost their lives. These terrorists seek to divide us, but they don't understand. Their actions only make us more determined and more united in our resolve to defeat them. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Annette Brooke.
I'm sure the whole House will wish to associate themselves with the Prime Minister's comments on this anniversary. We are haunted by images from Syria, millions of people needing aid, children dying. I thank the Prime Minister for his leadership at the G20 as far as humanitarian access is concerned. Will he now prepare a concrete plan, and what steps will he take to gain international support prior to the United Nations General Assembly later this month?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise this issue. A Syrian becomes a refugee every 15 seconds. Inside Syria, there are 6.8 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, and of course the UN appeal is only 44% subscribed. There's a serious shortage of money. We do have a plan between now and the UN General Assembly to encourage other countries to come forward, as we've done, with money, but also to back up Valerie Amos in her campaign to make sure there's proper access, and that means including priority humanitarian routes into the country, cutting bureaucracy, and of course humanitarian pauses in the conflict so the aid can get through, and she'll have our backing in getting others to support that, including potentially in a UN Security Council resolution.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I join the Prime Minister in remembering the terrible events of September the 11th, 2001, especially all the British citizens who died on that day. The mindless cruelty of that attack must never be forgotten, and today our thoughts are with the family and friends of those who died. Mr. Speaker, today's fall in unemployment is welcome. But does he recognise the concern that unemployment is still rising among young people and is close to 1 million, and that the number of people who are working part-time but can't find a full-time job is at record levels?
Well, first of all, can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for what he said about this anniversary of those dreadful events in New York. And can I also thank him for the welcome to the fall in unemployment. And let me say very clearly, you know, of course it's welcome when unemployment falls, but we've still got a long way to go. As the Chancellor said, we are turning a corner, but we need to build this recovery. We've got to go on backing businesses. We've got to go on dealing with our debts. There must be absolutely no complacency as we do everything we can to make sure this recovery delivers for hard-working people. But let me share with him the unemployment figures for the House's benefit as well. But it is good that employment is up another 80,000 this quarter, unemployment down 24,000, and the claimant count down 32,000 just this month. So unemployment is now lower than at the general election, and the number of new net private sector jobs, which we speak about as being 1.3 million, that is now, of course, 1.4 million, which is very welcome. He's absolutely right to raise youth unemployment. We do need to do more to get young people back to work. In terms of the youth claimant count, it's down by 10,900 this month, so there is some good news, but we need to build on our work on apprenticeships, build on our work with work experience, make sure the youth contract delivers, make sure children are learning the key skills at school, and help get those young people into work.
Mr. Speaker, he mentioned the Chancellor's speech on Monday. The Chancellor went out and said he'd saved the economy. Total complacency and total hubris. At a time when even today unemployment is rising in half of the country. In the east of England, the northeast, the northwest, Yorkshire and Humber, the West Midlands and Scotland. And after all, it was the Chancellor who choked off the recovery and now wants to somehow claim credit for it. And Mr. Speaker, people's living standards continue to fall. Can the Prime Minister confirm that wages are now around £1,500 lower than when he came to power?
me just remind him what the Chancellor said, which I think is perfectly legitimate, which is to point out that the party opposite told us there'd be no growth without Plan B. Yeah. Well, we have growth. They told us unemployment would go up and not down. Yeah. They told us the growth of private sector jobs would never make up for the loss of private sector jobs. They've been wrong on every single one of those issues. Now, of course, we need to do more to help with living standards, but the only way you can help with living standards sustainably is to deliver growth in the economy, and we are, to keep interest rates and mortgage rates low, and we are, and to cut people's taxes by raising the personal allowance. All the things this government's done, things his government would never do.
Miliband. Mr. Speaker, once again we see from the Prime Minister, as we did from the Chancellor, total complacency. It's the slowest. We're in the midst of the slowest recovery in 100 years, Mr. Speaker. Now, let's talk about his record. Can he tell us, out of the 39 months that he's been Prime Minister, how many months have prices been rising faster than wages and living standards fallen?
I said we face a challenge to help people with living standards, but because this government has taken 2 million people out of tax and has cut income tax for 25 million working people, actually household disposable income went up last year. That's what's happening. But as I said right at the beginning, we have to build on this. We've got to keep going with dealing with the deficit, helping business to employ people. But he talks about policy. Let me just remind him what the former Chancellor said. The former Chancellor said this: "I'm waiting to hear what we've got to say on the economy." That is the verdict of the former Chancellor. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, we're all waiting to hear for a single constructive suggestion from the party opposite.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House and the country will have heard the Prime Minister unable to answer the question about what is happening to living standards. Let me give him the answer. The answer is that for 38 out of 39 months that he has been Prime Minister, living standards for working people have gone down, not up. Now, can he confirm that the only month when wages rose faster than prices was when he handed out the millionaire's tax cut and city bonuses went up? Calm down, hang on a sec. And when city bonuses went up 82%.
Well, his speeches are so poor, as we saw yesterday, it's difficult to know when he's finished. I have to say, the truth is...
Calm down, just take longer otherwise. Very simple. Prime Minister.
He went to Bournemouth and he completely bottled it. That is the truth. That is the truth, Mr. Speaker. The fact is, in this economy, business confidence is up, consumer confidence is up, exports are up, and yes, of course, the point I'd make about bonuses is when he was sitting in the Treasury, they were 4 times higher. And under this government, the top rate of tax will be higher than any year when he or the Shadow Chancellor sat and advised the last disastrous Labour government. That is the truth of it. This government is making good the mess that he made in government.
He cannot answer the question on living standards because he knows that the truth is people are worse off under this government. And here's the reality. They want to give maximum support to millionaires who are getting business bonuses, so they give them a tax cut. But it's a different story for those who go to food banks. And we know what this government thinks about those who go to food banks, because the Children's Secretary said that people who go to food banks only have themselves. But one of the honourable members is groaning. It just shows how out of touch this Conservative Party is. Now we'd all like to hear, does the Prime Minister agree with his Children's Secretary?
Food bank use went up 10 times under Labour, so we don't have to take any lectures from them. And while we're on the issue of complacency, let me tell him, real complacency is going back to tax and spend and borrowing through the roof. Real complacency is promising no more boom and bust. Real complacency is thinking you can win an election when we've learned this week they've got no economic policy, no foreign policy, and no leadership either. He promised us a blank sheet of paper 3 3 years in, I think we can agree he's delivered.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister neither defended the Children's Secretary's comments nor distanced himself from him. Let me just tell him, the Children's Secretary is an absolute disgrace. Mr. Speaker, let's see any of them try and live on £150 a week. And then we'd see what happens. We've got 1 million young people out of work, unemployment up in half the country, millions of people worse off, while millionaires get a tax cut. For the few, not the many. He's the two-nation Prime Minister.
It is this Education Secretary that's delivering the results we need in our education system. Free schools, academy, rigour in our schools, and he should be praising him. I tell him what a disgrace is, and that is going down to Bournemouth and caving into the trade unions. We were promised this great big tough fight, this great big tough speech. He told us it was going to be raging bull. He gave us chicken run.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend and the government have been working hard to attract inward investment into northern Lincolnshire and the Humber region with considerable success. But these efforts could be undermined by further delays to the application, to determine the application by Able UK. Could I urge the Prime Minister to respond to requests from the leader of North Lincolnshire Council and the Humber LEP to intervene to ensure an early determination of the application well before December deadline?
Well, I've spoken to my honourable friend and to his Humberside colleagues on a number of occasions about this very important investment. We all want to see the Humber estuary become a real magnet for investment, particularly green energy investments. I'm very happy to look at the issue that he's raised with me and raised with me before, and very happy to look particularly at the issue of the planning permission with, of course, the responsible council.
Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the parents of the 1 million young unemployed people will think the Prime Minister is totally out of touch. This year, the number of young people with jobs has dropped by 77,000, and the government's youth contract has reached fewer than 1/10 of the young people it was supposed to help. Doesn't the Prime Minister understand that not everybody lands their first job with help from a royal equerry?
Say to the honourable lady, she should welcome the fact that the number of young people who are claiming out-of-work benefits has fallen by 10,900 this month. That is what's happening. 100,000 young people accessing work experience, many of them getting off work. It is 20 times more cost-effective than the Future Jobs Fund that she supported. That's what is happening under our economy. But as I said, there's absolutely no complacency. More needs to be done to get young people into work.
Nadine Dorries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, despite having enough evidence to prosecute, the CPS chose not to proceed and prosecute doctors in Britain offering to abort a baby because it was a female. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this is very uncomfortable, that in fact the 67 Act is now almost obsolete and puts our abortion policy on a par with India and China, and a female fetus in the womb today is more vulnerable than she was last week?
No, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this, and let's be clear that abortions on the basis of a child's sex are wrong and illegal in our country. And I think the Daily Telegraph is to be commended for the campaign and the work that they've done to highlight this important case. But in our country, we do have independent prosecuting authorities. It's very important that they look at the evidence and they make a decision on the basis of likelihood of getting a conviction and the public interest in making a case and taking it to court. That's how things have to work in our country, but I share her concern about what we've read and what has happened, and it's absolutely right that professional action should be considered as well.
Mr. Albert Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Sunday, I joined the Walk on Wales Army veterans on the Anglesey leg of the 870-mile tour of Wales. Walk on Wales is a charity campaigning to raise awareness for their comrades suffering with mental illness. While there's been great progress over the last 10 years, can the Prime Minister assure the House that he is redoubling his efforts to ensure that the NHS has access to army records so we can give the best possible service and treatment to our brave comrades? And will he join me in congratulating and wishing success Walk On Wales?
Well, I certainly congratulate Walk On Wales for their work and also commend him for his efforts in his own constituency, a beautiful one to walk round. It is important that we put money into veterans' charities, as we're doing, using the LIBOR funds to support many causes, including mental health causes. But as he says, it's very important that the National Health Service responds properly to these demands. The particular points about army records, I'll look into and perhaps write to him about that specific issue.
Gordon Birtwistle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after years of decline, manufacturing is now leading this country out of the financial mess left by the previous government. Can I compliment my right honourable friend on his decision not to implement Plan B, suggested by the party opposite, and ask him to continue to support our outstanding manufacturing base, particularly in my constituency and across the North West in general.
I certainly join the honourable gentleman. He's absolutely right to say that the news on manufacturing is good. Actually, all 13 of the manufacturing sectors have increased, and that's the first time this has happened since 1992. And of course, the party opposite doesn't like hearing this good news, including the news that, of course, Jaguar Land Rover made the great announcement about 1,700 new jobs in this week. And so we must go on backing British business, backing exports, backing manufacturing, and make sure we make this a sustainable recovery that works for hard-working people.
Moria De Piero.
I'm embarrassed that, while so many people struggle, city bonuses are up £700 million this year.
Said city bonuses are actually 86% lower than they were when she was supporting the last government. But let me just point out. Let me just point out to the honourable lady, because I follow these things very closely. She tweeted this morning that she had a question to the Prime Minister and she asked for suggestions. And the first suggestion came back, because I follow these things very closely, as you know, Mr. Speaker. The first suggestion came back was this: how happy are you that the leader of the Labour Party will still be in place come the next election? I can't think. And take advice from the Shadow Chancellor. I can't think.
Unemployment in Hastings and Rye has fallen for 6 months running. And today we learned that under this government, 3 times as many jobs have been created in the private sector as has been lost in the public sector. Does the Prime Minister believe that this is a complete fantasy, as suggested by the Shadow Chancellor?
Yes. Prime Minister. I think the honourable lady my honourable friend makes a very important point. Because what we have seen is the growth of private sector jobs far outstripping, by 3 times, as she says, more than 3 times in some cases, outstripping the decline in public sector jobs. And this was one of the predictions made by the party opposite. They said it was a fantasy to suggest that could happen. They said that there'd been no growth without Plan B. They predicted rises in unemployment. They've been wrong on every major economic judgment.
Gavin Shuker.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. I also asked my constituents what I should ask the Prime Minister today. And I should say that far away from the knockabout of this session, many people are concerned about wages and prices. When prices outstrip wages, isn't it not the case that under this Prime Minister, working people are poorer than they were when he came to government?
The point is this: when prices outstrip wages, it is really important to cut people's taxes. And that's what we've done by delivering a tax cut to 25 million working people, lifting the personal allowance, giving people a £700 tax cut. We've only been able to do that because we've taken tough decisions on spending, tough decisions on welfare, tough decisions on the deficit, tough decisions that he has wrongly rejected.
Mr. Gavin Barwell.
Speaker, when the party opposite left government, there were 770 young people in my constituency out of work. Today there are just 585, and we now have Westfield and Hammerson proposing to invest £1.5 billion to transform our town centre and create thousands of jobs. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how the government can help with the infrastructure improvements that will end the scourge of youth unemployment in our town that we inherited from the last government?
My honourable friend makes an important point. Of course we still have more work to do to get young people into work, but overall 1.4 million more people employed in the private sector, record levels in our history of women in employment, the number of people in work almost up by 1 million since the election, unemployment lower than at the election, long-term unemployment down on a year ago. We've still got more work to do, but we're heading in the right direction. We've got to keep on track and keep working to help business to take people on.
Mr. Tom Clark.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister tell us why people with mental illnesses are being kept in police cells?
Well, we are making efforts to try to bring that to an end by better working between the NHS and the police. This has been a long-standing problem under governments of all colours for a very long time, but we're having those discussions to try and make good progress.
Mr. Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, in May 2010, youth unemployment in Crawley was at 7.4%. Now it stands at 3.8%. On the 27th of September, I'm holding a jobs fair in Crawley. Does the Prime Minister think that such events are something that all right honourable and honourable members can do to help us turn the corner further still?
Well, I congratulate businesses in Crawley and the right honourable gentleman for helping to encourage this private sector-led recovery where we're seeing more people into work. We're also seeing the number of young not in education, employment and training. That number is at its lowest for a decade. But as I said, there's absolutely no complacency. There's more work that needs to be done to make sure this recovery delivers for people who work hard and do the right thing.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you. In April last year, I asked the Prime Minister about the thousands of people visiting food banks, and his reply then suggested a shocking complacency. His replies to the Leader of the Opposition today suggest that he hasn't learned anything since. Will he answer the question, does he think that the 500,000 people visiting food banks now simply need to manage their finances better, or will he admit that they can't afford to feed their families because of his government?
The point I would make is that we should work with and thank the food bank movement for the excellent work that they do. We should recognise that the use of food banks went up 10 times under Labour. One of the reasons it's increased under this government is because we took the block that her party put in place that was preventing job centres from referring people to food banks. They didn't do it because it was bad PR. Well, this government's interested in doing the right thing rather than just something that looks good.
Mr. Richard Fuller.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask the Prime Minister if national standards for sales and marketing practice in this country are strong enough to protect against false advertising? Apparently yesterday, a man in Bournemouth advertised himself as made of steel, only to collapse entirely within seconds.
I think my honourable friend makes a good point. I admire everything that happens in Dorset, but I think they need to look at their trading standards, because I have to say, he folded faster than a Bournemouth deck chair.
Carl Turner.
The Chancellor blames the Eurozone crisis for the problems in the UK economy. But yet, since 2010, real wages in France and Germany have risen, but in Britain they've fallen. Will the Prime Minister finally take responsibility for the living standards crisis that families are facing in this country?
As I've said many times, times are tough because we're recovering from the calamitous situation left by the party opposite. And if he wants to make comparison with Eurozone countries, he'll see that we've got a much lower unemployment rate than many of them. There are no other European countries that can boast a record of 1.4 million new private sector jobs. And the best way to help people's living standards, the best way to help people out of poverty, is to help them into work. And I would have thought the Labour Party would understand that.
In Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the TUC voted for coordinated strike action this autumn. What effect does the Prime Minister think this would have on our economy and the lives of hard-working people?
I think the document produced by the Unite Union, which still sponsors and basically controls so many of the members opposite, is frankly a very frightening document, because it is trade union leaders, not ordinary trade unionists, that are doing this. It is trade union leaders that want to damage our country, want to damage our economy, and are playing politics with our future.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tyrell Matthews Burton was a bright 19-year-old with everything to live for from Walthamstow, whose only crime was to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yet 2 months on from his brutal murder in Crete, the only contact the Greek authorities have had with his family is to send home the clothes he was wearing that night in the post. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and his grieving mother to see how we can get justice for Tyrell?
I'm very happy to hold that meeting. I think it is really important that we do everything we can to help families that are put in this position. To be fair to our consular services around the world, they do cope, I think, extremely well. They try to go the extra mile, they work very hard, and I know the Foreign Office encourages them in all that they do. But there are cases where things don't work out in the way that they should, and where we struggle to get answers from other countries about their justice systems and what's happening, and I'm very happy to hold the meeting that she speaks about.
Brooks Newmark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tragically, John Ray Infant School, one of the largest infant schools in Braintree, sadly burnt down a few days ago. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking Essex County Council for the speed with which they found alternative accommodation for the children, and giving the encouraging news the school will be rebuilt as soon as possible?
Well, I certainly join him in praising his county council. This sounds like a tragic event, and it comes on top of the fact that everybody knows that we need to provide more primary school places, so I commend them for their quick action.
Mr. Lindsay Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, since the government took office, the UK has suffered the second biggest fall in wages in any of the G20 countries. Does he think this is evidence that he has saved our economy?
As I've said several times this question time, if we want to see living standards recover properly, and I do, there's only one sustainable way to make that happen: a growing economy, keeping on top of inflation, making sure mortgage rates are kept low, and then cutting people's taxes by raising the personal allowance. That is how you help households with their disposable income. And let me just make this point. If we listened to Labour and had more spending, more borrowing, more debt, the first thing that would go up would be interest rates and mortgage rates. And for all the talk of the cost that families face, the increase in mortgage rates would wipe out all of the hard work that we have done. The Shadow Chancellor says you wait. Well, we are waiting for one single sensible suggestion from a party whose front bench have got it comprehensively wrong in the last 3 years.
Mr. Speaker, as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Bangladesh, I'm pleased to be leading a delegation as part of our report into the Rana Plaza collapse. May I thank DFID for their rapid response in this matter and all the extra funding that was placed their way. And will he join me in encouraging all businesses that trade garments in the UK to ensure they're ethically traded and make sure that other people are not exploited for our market?
Well, first of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for the work that she does to further relations between Britain and Bangladesh. Can I thank her for her reference to DFID, who work extremely hard with that country. I think she's absolutely right to draw attention to that appalling industrial accident, and to encourage companies to check their supply chains and to check where their produce is coming from. I think it's a really important point that she makes, and I wish her well with the work she's doing with Bangladesh.
Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister think that A&E crisis has anything to do with the fact that he has cut over 5,000 nurses posts since the general election, as figures from the Health and Social Care Information Centre published?
The point is that since the election we've protected health spending, and we're putting an extra £12.7 billion into our NHS, and the number of clinical staff, including doctors in our hospitals, has gone up, whereas the number of managers has gone down. Under Labour, things were heading in an entirely different direction.
Sir Bob Russell.
Successive governments have condemned ethnic cleansing. Will the Prime Minister today condemn Israel for its ethnic cleansing of 40,000 Bedouin?
Well, this government has a very clear policy on the issue of Israel and on the issue of settlements. We respect and welcome Israel's right to exist, and we defend that. But on settlements, we think that the Israeli approach is wrong, and we condemn the settlement activity. And we've been consistent in saying that, both privately and publicly.
Mr. George Galloway. Does the Prime Minister get it, Mr. Speaker, that if it were not for this House of Commons reflecting the mood of the British public, Britain and the United States would already be in the midst of what it has turned out would have been a wholly unnecessary war? Isn't this a vindication of Parliament and a vindication of Mr. Churchill's words that jaw is better than war?
What it is a vindication of is determination to stand up to chemical weapons use. We would not be in this situation of pursuing new avenues of getting Syrian chemical weapons out of Syria and destroyed unless a strong stance had been taken. That is the right answer, not crawling up to dictators and telling them how wonderful they are.